So this week we are looking at the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria Ashkenazi. And he is, in many ways, the single most influential rabbi of the last 500 years, um, maybe without even any close competition. And what's interesting is uh, that I would say most people don't have a very close understanding of what he taught, but we'll talk about why he was so influential and why he is so remarkable. So let us start. The Arizal left no written word. He taught his students. He was in Tzfat for about 3 years. He's originally educated in Egypt, and he comes to Tzfat. Interestingly, the name Ashkenazi is a Sephardic name. It's sort of one of those funny things because if if you go to if you go to Texas, you can be Andy from Canada, but nobody calls you Andy from Canada when you live in Toronto, right? Because everybody's from Canada. So Ashkenazi means that ultimately his family had at least at some point roots in Ashkenaz, and I think the funny thing is that Nusach Sfard, the prayer system that is known as Nusach Sfard, is really an Ashkenazic prayer system of rabbis who were very influenced by the teachings of the ARI, and they wanted to be more mystical, and so they wanted to be more Sephardic because the ARI was Sephardic, so they called it Nusach Sfard. It's just one of those funny things. But I really digress. This is not what you came to hear me talk about in terms of the ARI. So the ARI is often referred to by this acronym, the Arizal. Um, Rabbi I, which Ari means the lion. Um, Obviously, you could also use the Resh and the Yud of Ari as Rabbi Yitzchak. Maybe the Aleph is Ashkenazi, but he is often referred to by that name, the Arizal. There may be a good reason for that. We'll get to that in a minute. But he didn't leave a single written word. Um, and in one of the Kabbalistic works of the 16th or 17th century, the Talmud Chachma, he is quoted as having said the following: it is impossible to write down my teachings. This is again the Ari speaking, because all things are interrelated. I can hardly open my mouth to speak without feeling as though the sea burst its dams and overflowed. How then can I express what my soul has received, and how can I put it down in a book? He just felt that it was just too much. Things were flowed with such tremendous force, and things were so interconnected that he was unable to put it down into a book. Now, it it um, it is said though that he knew the world of Kabbalah as if they were the labyrinthian streets of Tzvat. Um, he was, you know, he understood the connections between all of these different things. This great sea of Kabbalah, he understood things in a remarkable fashion, and he taught things to his students. And he only was in Tzvat for 3 years, and he told his students they had to lock up their notebooks and they could only take them out during class. He did not want this to spread around. This was meant to be something that was quite closely held to him. It also is the case that he would go around Tzvat and he would find the lost graves of various tzaddikim. I guess Shimon Bar Yochai, others of the Talmudic era who lived in the Galil. That was part of the discovery in Tzvat. But maybe one of the most important details that we have to understand about the Ari is that the Ari is understood to have learned his Kabbalah from Eliyahu Hanavi. It just happens to be interestingly the case that during the 16th century, there were just a lot of rabbis who had dreams, encounters with angels. We will discuss this in detail, but we spoke about it when we did Shlomo Malcho and a little bit about Yosef Karo. Each of them had this Magid, this angel that spoke to them in a dream that was a very important presence in their lives. Uh, um, it was not an uncommon phenomenon. And I shouldn't say it was common. Your average tailor did not have that, but a number of the prominent rabbis did have this sense that there was some form of prophecy, and Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet, maybe a Magid who spoke to them. And that is how the Ari has a unique claim to be able to interpret the Zohar in ways that his predecessors had not. Now let's just be clear, he is not deviating from the Zohar in amazing fashion. He is rather reinterpreting it. He's giving you maybe some detail on where the Zohar was general. He dies at the age of 38, and maybe this is why he is known as Zal, Zichrono Livracha, because it seems like such a very young age to pass away. The, how could someone so young have such a profound impact? But yet he did. Usually, by the way, when you have a profound genius of this sort, they also need somebody who is a propagator of the knowledge. So there are two people who are particularly responsible, although there was really a cadre of students. And you'll notice that the the teaching itself, the core of the teaching, is very, very powerful. And so it may not need such a strong mouthpiece. Its core ideas are extremely, extremely compelling. But there are a number of people who at least we should be aware of who were part of the development of this. One is Rabbi Chaim Vital, his principal student, who claims that he never had any new information to write, that rather he was simply reporting the facts as his teacher taught them. He was a pure tzinor, he was a pure conduit of the information. His his teachings are recorded in a number of books, maybe the most famous of which is the Eitz Chaim. And once, when Rabbi Vital was quite sick, someone essentially bribed his brother to be able to look at Chaim Vital's notebooks. Even after the Ari died, he did not allow other people to look at them. But then there was that one spell of sickness. His brother took a bribe, presumably to help the Reb Chaim get better. And those copies ended up in the hands of Rabbi Yisrael Sarug, who went to essentially Emilia-Romagna, Ferrara, Fano, Bologna, that area, and he taught them. And then once they were in Italy, they caught like wildfire and went throughout Europe. And his, again, the teachings, maybe one of the best ways to have teachings expand is if we attempt to keep them secret, right? People really don't want to know what you are not letting them know. Now, I just think this is my own musing. There is a very striking similarity of the origin of all between essentially the Big Bang and the theory of relativity and the idea of the Kabbalistic creation, especially the Lurianic version. Remember that in the Zohar there is an idea that at the beginning, just before Bereshit, you have this moment of pure emanation, that the Ein Sof, the infinite of God, sort of emanates outward. And that is, very similar to the Big Bang, is that you have this point of light, which all of the mass of the universe is in one exact point, and it explodes to become this, in the physical picture of it, it first explodes as pure energy, even too hot to be even a photon of light. Then we cool down a little bit, and the slight imbalance between things creates photons. Ultimately, photons create particles. Particles become atoms. Atoms become planets, etc., etc., etc. The idea of creation in the Lurianic version is extremely important, and it has a moment in it which is different than both the relativistic version and also between the Zohar version, and that is the idea of tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is the great contraction. So, as I said in the Zohar, everything emanates out from the Ein Sof. In the Zohar's version of things, everything projects outward. But the Ari has has a different idea, and he really turns this idea of tzimtzum on its head. Maybe one of the first mentions of this word tzimtzum, l'tzamtzem, means to contract within yourself, to retract, if you will, to resect. And in the Midrash Rabbah, the interesting point is that it's talking about God and the Holy of Holies and the between the Kruvim, between the angels of the Ark of the Covenant. And it says, I, God says, I will go down to earth and I will make my presence into the space of a cubit by a cubit. So the this idea of God contracting is that God is everywhere and vast, perhaps even infinite. But instead of being infinite, God will be finite as a cubit a cubit by a cubit. The the Ari goes even further than that. The Ari's point is that Tzimtzum is the evacuation before emanation, not a concentration to a point, but the evacuation from a point. That you are literally emptying out God. And this is the shrinkage of God in everything. That there needs to be a place that is entirely absent of God. There is no God in any of this. That is itself a very, very um, intense point to take in.
Well, can
This
I
is
ask you a quick question?
yes, please.
Um, two slides before this one, there was that the beginning. That looked like a bottle with a point of light, and there was
Yeah,
some
that's
text.
a scheme of the Big Bang.
Was there text that was written there? It was too small for us to see on your screen. Was there anything noteworthy that we should know about? Was it a
Um,
timeline or what was that?
yeah, yes, I think that is a time that I use that as a comparison. That slide is one of the standard slides of sort of the expansion of the universe when clouds formed. It could be a temperature scale, it could be a time scale. I didn't look at it that closely. Really,
Okay.
I was using it for a comparison just of the idea that the Big Bang is a creation, is an emanation from a point, right? And here, maybe the important thing for us to at least digest about Tzimtzum is that God is evacuating himself from a point. Um, Now, according to Luria, God was compelled to make room for the world, as it were, abandoning a region within himself, a kind of mystical primordial space from which he withdrew in order to return to it in the act of creation and revelation. The, the, the idea is perhaps generated by the fact that God is so pervasive in all reality. God exists in everything so powerfully that there is no room for any independent creation without first having a tzimtzum, without first having a retraction. This idea is an incredibly powerful idea, and I'm going to try and capture its various dimensions. There are a number of different ways you can go about looking about why the tzimtzum is so powerful, and I'm going to try and touch on some of them. You can feel free if I didn't cover them all to jump in and say them. Gershon Sholem again says this is the only serious attempt ever made to give substance to the idea of creation out of nothing. Because the question really is what is nothing? Is nothing really nothing? Because if in the Zohar's version of things, God creates the world out of God's own light, right? So that's really not nothing. We can attach a noun to that which creation was made out of. The Ari is going to say, no, there is really a nothingness that is created. Now, that nothingness is a very powerful thing, as we'll see. In
Do you
order
mean?
to go just a little bit further, I wanted to give us a little bit of one of these original texts of Chaim Vital. So in order to do that, I just have to give you a few terms. There are four worlds: Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, Va'asiya. The Atzilut is sort of the noble creation. That is sort of the the highest level. That is God's contemplation of creation. And then Bria, Yetzira, Bria is sort of maybe the creation of the original divisions of the light. Yetzira might be the Sfirot, and Asiya is the world we live in, is the physical world. And I am not an expert in any of these things, so you may have a better definition of these worlds than I do. But you at least need to know that those four things are sort of four stages of the emanation of God's light and the emanation and the development of the created world in the Kabbalistic system. Okay, so this is the Mava'o She'arim of Rabbi Chaim Vital. Um, um, okay, so let's do chapter 1. No. Kiterem shehetzil hama'atzil atzilut, before God sort of conceived of this, the first conception of creation, v'chol ha'amot ha'elu, and all of the worlds, asher heim achshav netzalim v'nivraim v'notzrim v'nasim, all of them which are conceived of, which are created, which are formed, and then which are made. Heina az terem shenetzlu haya ein sof memalek kol makom hazeh. The Ein Sof, meaning the infinite of God's presence, filled absolutely everything. Asher bo omdim dalid olamot. Those dalid olamot, the four worlds, are the same four that I showed you on the previous slide. Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. V'lo haya shum davar chutz mimenu. There was nothing in it other than God. Afilu b'chinat rekanut va'avir panui b'tocho. Right? The idea, there's no such thing as emptiness or open air that's within it. Or b'shum tzad mitzadav, or any side from on the side of it. Lo haya b'shum ofen sheba'olam. There was no such thing. Ki oto lo haya lo sof klal v'ikar. That light had no beginning or end. It was everything. B'cheven sha'kol haya memula min ha'or hu nikra ein sof. Because everything was absolutely filled with light, it was called the never-ending. In Cain, lo yaha fresh bo miktzotav el ktzotav. There was no differentiation between one end and the other, right? This sort of infinite cycling light, or this infinite light, there was no differentiation in it at all, it would seem, because everything is exactly the same from one end to the other. Ad sheyitzdak bo b'china ma'ala amata pnim v'achor. Right? There could not be no up, down, inside, outside. As you would find now, after the conceptualization of creation, right? There's this first initial stage where that change is going to happen. But before that, everything is undifferentiated. V'atam, and the reason, ki harei kol ha'or haya shaveh ba'achdut uv'hashva'a gmura. All of the light was exactly equivalent. It was totally homogeneous. There was no differentiation within it at all. There was, seem also maybe, I don't know if he means there's no time differentiation, or whether he means there is no beginning, starting point or end point. There's no projection point and reflection point. So that we could say that the place of the beginning was called elevation. Makom hasof yikra mata, and the end would be called down. V'gam kevan shakol or echad b'hashva'a lo haya bo shum shem okinoi. We can't talk about it because there's no way to discuss it because everything was entirely undifferentiated. Now, the reason I took this particular section is because I found it very powerful in how it explores what it means to be God in the original state. That there's no differentiation. When we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, I would say we rarely think about what does that oneness mean. But here, this oneness is a pervasive oneness. It's an infinite oneness. It does not allow for description in any way because everything is exactly equal, right? Forgive the crude analogy, but if you've ever snowed in flat light, it's really hard because you can't see any of the ridges. Everything is just white. So you can't describe the terrain to yourself because everything is undifferentiated. So things that have no variation um, it cannot be described, and so that's why we call it the Ein Sof, that the never ending, because we couldn't even find the beginning. So we can't talk about the all beginningness. So we talk about it as the never endingness. But that even the term speaks about how poorly we are capable of describing this. But what I love about this is how deeply the Kabbalists are thinking about these these concepts. And they really are quite profound philosophical and theosophical problems. Okay, so this is what one of the things that Chaim Vital is going to tell us about the act of tzimtzum, this act of retraction. Gam tavin, you should understand, ki b'chol bechinot haotzaot haorot. In all of the various stages where God's emanation is going to cascade through these various sfirot, harot chadashim haya kodem lahem inyan tzimtzum. For every new creation, there is first going to have to be a retraction. So for a moment, I'm just going to pause for this is a Shelley Carroll comment. Shelley, you're going to love this. There is a imitatio Dei lesson that is very valuable here. The idea that if God had to retract to make space for the world, then we all have to in our engagement with the rest of the world is we need to make space for other people. It's a very powerful thing. You know, just if you want to be a good friend, if you want to be that person that really everybody trusts, work on this. Be mitzamtzim yourself, retract yourself so that you can be there to listen for other people. If you want to be a disliked person, be that person who has so much ego that you take up all the oxygen in the room. Leadership is about making room for other people. And so each leaders have to figure out an act of tzimtzum. They have to find that act of humility to make space for other people. Shelley, will you validate that that is in fact a Shelley Carroll comment? No? Okay.
Where is she? Oh, she's not talking.
Ah, okay.
Rabbi Mordecai Rothenberg, Rabbi. Same comment.
Oh, yeah. The idea of right, Rav Mordecai, you mean the Marami Rottenberg? Except for
Yeah,
the Marami Rottenberg would not have
yeah,
talked about it in
yeah,
terms of tzimtzum.
yeah.
He
He
would talk
said like,
about he would talk about
yeah,
it in
he
terms
said,
of humility.
yeah, an entity's willingness to contract itself in order to make room for others. Exactly what you said, Rabbi.
Right. So um, I should also just at this point also clarify. A couple weeks ago, we were studying the Zohar, and I put up the slide of the Sulam, and the Sulam reads into the Zohar a certain moment which he calls Tzimtzum. And I think it was Annie who said, "Wait a minute, didn't the Ari invent the idea of Tzimtzum?" And I think that historically that is 100% correct. That people did not talk about Tzimtzum, did not talk about this retraction until the Ari. But after the Ari, everybody, this was such a powerful concept that everybody read it back in as if it was part of the original conceptualization. Okay. Now, this is also an important concept to just look at in terms of the tzimtzum. The first step was not a step out, but a step in, right? God does not project out, but pulls in. But it is also the deepest expression of exile. This is God exiled from the world. This is going to be part of what is going to create a tremendous problem, a spiritual problem, because you don't want to live in a world devoid of God. The tzimtzum, as powerful a concept as it was, it creates a world that is devoid of God, and then that has to be filled, right? We need godliness to refill the world. But first, it starts with an exile. And of course, the idea that even the divine is exiled is a very powerful concept for a people who are living in exile, right? The heart of the Jewish community now is in Tzfat. The Jerusalem community is too oppressed for most of these people uh, to to be able to have a flourishing Torah life. The taxes are too steep. The environment is inhospitable. We learned about that last week. And so this idea of exile, right? ARI is coming from Egypt, moving to Tzfat. They're under the Ottoman Empire. They've just been exiled from Spain. They've been exiled from Naples. All of these events are very traumatic. But the idea that God also was exiled, that too is truly powerful. Okay, now it's important for us to discuss a little bit this idea of din, because what is going to happen is that this exile itself is itself an act of din. And before we had the tzimtzum, there was strict justice in the Ein Sof. But as one of the ARI's students, Yosef ibn Tabul, says, the din, the justice, was like a drop of salt in the ocean, right? And so you didn't perceive the din. It was sort of um, if she could do that, and so it's imperceptible. Then what happens is we have this act of creation. And in the Tzimtzum itself, we have an act of limitation. Din is understood by the Kabbalists as structure. It is that which keeps things as what they are or within boundaries. It is a fascinating concept of what justice is, because justice is necessary in the world. You cannot have structure, or you cannot have existence without structure. You cannot have existence without rigidity. And so this event of creating a tzimtzum, God is going to have to create a vacuum. That vacuum is going to have to be preserved by something. That material that preserves things, that is din. And din also becomes evil itself. Because evil ultimately will be structure untempered by rachamim. We'll see that concept manifest again when we get to the kings of Edom. And I know you're thinking, how are we going to get to the kings of Edom? Stay tuned. We will get to the kings of Edom. But what I want us to understand is that in order for the world to have preservation, it had to have din. It had to have justice. And so in the original pre-Tzimtzum state, justice is mixed in as a very small sort of trace element. But when we actually move to the broader to the Tzimtzum state, we're going to need a lot of din. And certainly once we move past the Tzimtzum into future creations, we're going to see that din becomes even more and more powerful.
May I ask a question, please?
Yes.
So before Tzimtzum, why should there be any din at all, any justice at all? I look at justice in this case also as God giving structure to the world, that everything will run, like a big master engineer. So is that what you mean by din? And before Tzimtzum, there is just a tiny bit of din, and after Tzimtzum, there's more justice, more din?
Because
it's not clear to me how
I would say probably what you will see is that the din this is not I cannot claim to be any expert to be able to explain this in great depth, but my understanding is that there has to be din because it is not that God creates anything that the attributes of God are immutable. And so if din becomes an attribute of God after the creation, it must have also existed within the in the Ein Sof, right?
It's part of the creation, is it not? Part of the creation to put the structure in the world so that it all runs okay.
No, but one of the sfirot in the Zohar, there is a sphira of din, right? It is an element of what is godly. There is a general problem of evil, right? In theology, right? How is there evil in the world if God is all good, right? Would
Because
you not
God
agree?
removed himself from the world so that the world could be created, and he put
That's true.
evil in it. Put evil in it.
Okay, so in the Sorno system, what I'm hearing is evil is the absence of God, right? Okay, but that's not the ARI system.
Sorry, what's the Hebrew term for evil? Because you're just using the English word against the Hebrew word din.
Resha or Ra.
Yeah, either of those.
Oh, okay. There is not a specific, okay, more specific word. Okay.
Right. So it's going to, there are actually a lot of different words that become very synonymous here because it's sometimes going to be referred to as the klipa. It's right. So you have
Yeah.
different words that manifest. But the idea is that you need to have midat. The idea, by the way, is the Midrash says that there the origin of these idea of the kelim is that Akadosh Baruch Hu bore olamot umachrivan. That the Midrash says that God created worlds and destroyed them. The worlds that were created, all right, right, because it says Bereshit bara Elokim. Elokim in the Bereshit in the beginning, bara created Elokim. It uses the name Elokim and not the name Hashem, right? Not the Yud Hey Vav Hey name of Hashem. That idea of Elokim is the God of justice, right? Elokim is associated with Midat Hadin, with with strict justice. And so the Kabbalists are going to say that the early worlds were all created with too much Midat Hadin and not enough Rachamim. And that's why Hashem had to destroy them. So there is something compelling about the fact that Hashem wanted to create the world with a very strict, rigid set of rules. But the necessity was to mix in more rachamim. But zooming back out, one of the very important concepts that Rabbi Luria gives to the world is this idea of shvirat kelim, the breaking of the vessels. So here's how this story folds out. In the Adam HaKadmon is the first configuration of the divine light. That in the moment right after God creates a vacuum, the first sort of pouring of light into the world is called Adam HaKadmon, first Adam. And the Kabbalists are going to see. We read the story of Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. We read this as about a story about a man named Adam and his wife who was ultimately named Chava, right? And they ate a fruit, and we think it was an apple. I mean, I'm speaking about my own childish conceptualizations, but when I read the pages, that's what it sounds like to me, right? And that they were physically naked, and and she saw a snake, and she talked to the snake. The Kabbalists are going to say that is one reading of that, but that's certainly not the most important reading of it. The most important reading of it is that this is a symbolic description of the emanations of God into the creation of the world. And hopefully, yes, okay.
And not the first, not the only world.
Well, but the world we live in.
Yeah, but there must have been a few before that.
Okay, but so right, so that's the Borei Olamat Machiran of the Midrash, but
Exactly.
I don't think that's how the Ari is going to read it. The Ari is going to say that idea of Borei Olamat Machrivan is going to be described by him as the breaking of the vessels.
Ah, okay. Shvirat HaKelim.
Okay, so so in the if you see this little diagram here on your right, so this is from the same book that I was showing you before of Rabbi Chaim Vital, and this is the first differentiation. So the sphere the sphere is used as the symbol of the undifferentiated because all points are equidistant from its center. And the Tzimtzum was this sort of column of space um, that that the chut, it was like a strip that they put in there. And that is where Adam HaKadmon is. That's where the first light is poured into. And there wasn't need to preserve the light of this stage, and this level of the hierarchy in the special bowls. It didn't need to be, at this stage, God does not need to be separated into sfirot. The din does not need to be therefore to hold, because this is ultimately, I think, an intermediate stage in which the light is going to be poured further on into its next stages. Now, then the Adam HaKadmon, by the way, you'll see very often that Keter is the crown, or maybe the head. Bina and Chochma are the arms. This is a way, it creates the torso of a man in many of the sort of graphic representations. But the idea here is that this is these sfirot, these various ways in which God emanates into the world, are differentiated. And the three upper sfirot, which are Chochma, which is wisdom, Keter, which is crown, Bina, which is understanding, they gave shelter to the light. They had no problem there. Everything worked just fine in the top three sfirot. However, the lower six sfirot could not contain the light. And there was a shvirat of the kelim. The vessels became broken. And when the vessels become broken, then we have entering into the world both we have permanent evil entering into the world. The evil that manifests in the world is now evil of or strict justice of its own independent capacity. That God tried to make a world, or the idea was to make a world in which has stability. Moshe Cordovero basically said that this idea of din is the quality that everything wants to sort of stay as it is. It is the quality of being constant and remaining the same, which again is a very powerful concept. That the idea that evil is the stagnation in the world. It is the resistance of the world to improvement. Right? Again, another very powerful spiritual concept. And this breaking of the vessels meant most of the light returns back to God. But there are fragments of light that are buried in these klipot, that are buried in these broken vessels. And the idea of the broken vessels, interestingly, comes from, again, another reading of the Kabbalists of a section of the Torah which is different than the sort of the simple narrative understanding. We read this, on your right is just an illuminated Spanish Bible from maybe the 14th or 15th century. And it is in the Cambridge University library. They allow you to digitally download these, so I do. But it says, Eila Toldot Esav Hu Edom. These are the generations of Esav, which are Edom, right? And then it's going to give me the genealogy of the kings of Edom, the kings of Esav's line. They live, they build, they die, right? This description in the Torah is read by the Kabbalists as a description of the Shvirat HaKelim. This is the breaking of the vessels. And because for the ARI, we need to have a separate existence from God. The idea of Tzimtzum is that in order for evil to exist, there has to be independence. In order for free will to exist, there has to be independence. Before Tzimtzum, everything is undifferentiated. Everything is God. And so if everything is God, you cannot have free will. You cannot have independent man. You cannot have independent creation. You cannot have evil. The Tzimtzum allows for this. God's retraction from the world allows for this. And in order to give the world some sense of stability, some sense of constancy, the world needed a certain measure of din. It needed a certain measure of rigidity to do that. It needed just the right amount of rigidity. And in the Lurianic sense, we'll see actually from this quote from Menachem Azariah Fano. Menachem Azariah Fano is one of those Kabbalists who learns from Yisrael Sarug, or maybe the next generation, and he lives. Fano is just right near Ferrara, and he's a very interesting Kabbalist. And he basically said, just as the seed must burst forth in order to sprout and blossom, so too the versed bowls had to be shattered in order that the divine light, the cosmic seed, so to speak, might fulfill its function. You cannot have the world as it is without that bursting forth and breaking the vessels. It's a necessary step. It's unavoidable. It's not a mistake. It is simply part of the design of creation. And in that design of creation, evil can then exist as a separate entity. And this is maybe one of the ARI's most profound contributions. Maybe, he may not have seen himself as a philosopher. I think he saw, being a Kabbalist, though, does sometimes make you a philosopher. But here he gives explanation to how evil can separately exist. Yes, Mordechai.
Evening, Rabbi. Can we use the word possibly chesed of Ribbon Shalom to us humble humans? Otherwise, it's a chesed from Hashem that's synonymous, giving us also evil for us to make that tikkun and sharing.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. I don't want to use words that sound like they are. Again, I'm not. I'm really. I'm trying to give you some of the sort of fundamental ideas, and some of these more complex questions of the interrelations fill pages upon pages of these books on Kabbalah. And I don't pretend to be an expert, and I'm going to be away for the next 3 weeks. I'm happy to invite Rabbi Schachter back to talk about some of these ideas in depth, if people so choose.
I thought you were doing a Simpson, going away for 3 weeks.
I may be going to a Tzimtzum, but I'm doing an Aliyah also at the same time, so I'm going to be in Israel. So anyway, okay. Anna, you have your hand up.
Yes. Why did the first Sfirot, Keter, Chochmah, and Binah, not break? We're not part of the Shvirat HaKelim.
I wish I knew the exact answer to this, but such it is. I will try to see if I can give you a better answer on that. But right now, it.
Okay,
It could be because those are all conceptual areas, and so they don't necessarily penetrate into the permanence of the world. But I can't say. I will see if I can find
something different about them is they're not part of the Shvirat HaKelim.
It's not that they're not part of the Shvirat HaKelim, it's that they successfully can hold the light without rupturing. So, but we'll see. There's a little bit more to take out of this. Now,
Okay.
the birth of these pure new vessels is the evil is the dross of the primordial kings, those kings of Edom, right? And remember, Edom is Esav. Edom is also Midat Hadin. It is Midat Hadin bli rachamim. It is pure justice without any mercy. And so this is what gives birth to these new vessels. Now, these now broken vessels with pure evil, they also trap sparks of light. And here's where the Lurianic Kabbalah makes things quite powerful. In the Lurianic Kabbalistic system, it is our job to be the redeemers of the light. That Hashem builds the world in such a way that that light cannot return to Hashem without human intervention. And so humans, Jews, it is our job to go and liberate the light from the world. And just to give you an example of how this plays out, there is one place where the light does not need to be liberated from, and that's Egypt. And there's even a mitzvah not to go back to Egypt, because why would you need to go back to Egypt? Because Egypt is the only reason to go back there would be to liberate the light. But there's no light left there to liberate. All of the light of Egypt was liberated during Yetziat Mitzrayim, during the Exodus from Egypt. And so if all of the light went out with the Jews, you have no reason to go back there. This becomes also incredibly powerful because now God needs you. All 30 of you currently listening to this, maybe more if there are two people listening to the same screen. You all now need to go and be liberators of the light. That here in God's creation there is spiritually trapped material. And the only way to liberate it is to do mitzvot, do tikkunim. This is where the idea of letaken olam is. You have to fix the world because we have all these broken vessels and we have all this trapped light. And now in order to restore the light, you have to go and you have to do mitzvot. You have to elevate things. One of my favorite examples of tikkun is Rabbi Nachman of Breslov has Hasidic stories, but his Hasidic stories are totally different from all the Hasidic stories of all the other Hasidic masters. All the other Hasidic masters, they tell stories about, rabbis and Jews and taverns and burials and weddings, and they all involve rebbes and miracles. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov's stories are stories of they almost sound more like Aesop's fables than the stories of the Baal Shem Tov. And there's a reason for that. Because the Rabbi Nachman said that he took Aesop's fables, which themselves have light, but they were not perfectly adjusted to give you that lesson. And what Rabbi Nachman did was he reworked the stories in order that they teach you a spiritual lesson. He released the light. He stripped away the klippah. He stripped away the evil that was standing in the way, and he lets the light of these stories now shine through. So that's sort of this way of fixing the world, of liberating the light, finding these sparks in these different places and fixing the world. This is such a powerful idea because now every Jew everywhere immensely matters. If you at your Shabbos table are not liberating the light, you are preventing God from being returned out of exile. You are preventing the Mashiach from coming. You are now a thorn in the side of Jewish progress. On the other hand, if you do things right, if you shake your lulav in the right way, if you give charity in the right way, you are now part of the process of liberating the sparks, of being the fixer of the world. You are the repairman of the world, right? When the dishwasher is not working, and you're the person in the family who sits there, reads the manual, figures out how to get everything working, that sense of accomplishment you have because you've actually fixed something in your house. Well, this is fixing the world. This is a concept which has incredible power, and I think a lot of the ideas that come into this are themselves of a uniquely interesting nature, that God evacuated the world in order to have a place for us, and now it is our job to bring God into the world. This particular was sort of at the end of today's session, but trust me that the Torah of the ARI this idea of how the world works swept the Jewish world. To just give you an example, Jews, Ashkenazic Jews always put on tefillin on Chol Hamoed. That is, German Jews have the most pure Ashkenazic customs. And so German Jews put on tefillin with a bracha on Chol Hamoed. And now there is there's no most Ashkenazic Jews in Jerusalem do not put on tefillin on Chol Hamoed. Rabbi Menachem Azariah of Fano, who lived amongst Jews, who got a question from a Jew who was living in a city where everybody put on tefillin on Chol Hamoed. He's sort of the leading edge of the dispersion of the teachings of the ARI. So he lives in a city where or he got a question from someone who lived in a city where everybody put on tefillin. But here he's a Kabbalist. Kabbalists don't put on tefillin on Chol Hamoed because the Zohar says that you can't wear two crowns at once. And one of the crowns is the crown of the holiday. And so if you put on your tefillin, it's another crown, it competes, and you would be chayav mita, you're guilty of the death penalty. So Menachem of Azariah of Fano is asked, well, what should I do? Everybody here puts on tefillin. I can't act differently. There's a prohibition called lo tidgodedu, of not betraying the customs of your community. And in those days, if you lived in, let's say Brody, or you lived in Vilna, so everybody kept the same custom. It wasn't like, you could say it's not how I do it. Everybody had to do it. So what did Menachem Azariah of Fano tell him to do? He told him, take the parchments out of your tefillin on Chol Hamoed. So it looks like you're wearing tefillin, but you won't be wearing tefillin. I always thought it was so funny because I used to say, okay, you go into the tefillin store and you say, I want Rashi and I want Rabbeinu Tam and I want a Chol Hamoed pair. And this is the sort of it's my own joke. If you get it, you laugh. If not, you can ignore it. But the idea that this is how the fact that no Ashkenazic Jew in Jerusalem puts on a pair of tefillin in a synagogue anywhere in Jerusalem these days is a testament to how far this went. Because the way it worked was the teaching went from Tzfat to Italy, from Italy to Europe, from Europe it went to Western Europe or to Central Europe, went to the Gra, the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon students come down to Israel, and all of Israel now follows the Vilna Gaon students. But the Vilna Gaon's ancestors, all the people who ultimately came, all Ashkenazic Jews came more or less from France and Germany. All of those Jews put on tefillin during Chol Hamoed, and now none of them do. That shows you how powerful and how widely spread this particular teaching was. It will also set up some of the greatest catastrophes that the Jewish people have encountered. It is things that are this powerful are sometimes too powerful. And I will ask you to stay tuned because we will only learn about the effects, the counter movements, and the restoration movements if we stick with the current course of study. Okay,